Hello everyone, and welcome back to our bizarre and unusual world. Happy Halloween. Today I'm going to be talking about a very Halloween-specific crime. Today we'll be discussing the Ryan Obryan case, and/or the Candyman, as the media dubbed him. So as usual for my series, I will be covering the who, what, when, where, why, and how of this particular case. So starting off with the where, this case takes place in Deer Park, Texas, which is a suburb of Houston. The when is of course Halloween, but specifically October 31st, 1974. In the name Ronald Obryan, but who is he, and how is he connected to this case? Ronald Obryan was born October 19th, 1944. He of course lived in Deer Park with his wife and two children, a son named Timothy and a daughter named Elizabeth. He worked as an optician and was very involved in their local church. From the outside, you would assume that he was a pretty normal family man, but that would prove to not be the case at all. So what? What happened in this Candyman case? That Halloween in 1974. So that night, Ronald's family and some friends of theirs decided that they would go trick-or-treating together. So the two families had dinner, and then the fathers took their young children out to go trick-or-treating. Now most years it seemed that Ronald wasn't really very interested in this holiday, but this year he was very excited to get his children out there trick-or-treating. So they started down the streets to trick-or-treat. They came to a dark, kind of empty house. The kids knocked, but there was no answer, so as you do, you kind of just move on to the next house. But for some reason, Ronald was very fixated on this house. He told the kids to go ahead with their other friends, and he was going to stay at that house and continue knocking until someone answered the door, which is weird. Now, Ronald would tell police later that finally, after he kept knocking, someone answered the door, but it was very dark. He could not see anyone's face. All he could see was an arm reach out, a very hairy arm, and this arm handed him 5 pixie sticks, which if you're not familiar with pixie sticks, it is kind of a type of powdery candy that's kind of in a long straw-like container. So this mystery person hands Ronald 5 pixie sticks and then shuts the door. Ronald then meets back up with his children. He gives a pixie stick to each of his kids, Timothy and Elizabeth, one to each of his friends' kids, 2 more, and then on the way he saw a boy from church and he gave the 5th and final pixie stick to that boy. Now that Halloween night, it ended up being pretty rainy, so they only trick-or-treated like a couple streets, and then they called it a night and headed home. So in the Obryan household, the kids were allowed to pick 1 piece of candy before they went to bed, for their Halloween goodie, if you will. And unfortunately, Timothy Obryan picked the large pixie stick. Now, the pixie stick was stapled in such a weird way that the young boy had a problem opening it. So his father came over and actually helped him open this pixie stick. And immediately, Timothy started eating the candy. So immediately Timothy said that the candy was not sweet. It was very bitter and gross. So to wash away that taste, Ronald gave him some Kool-Aid, hoping it would just wash away that bitterness. But it didn't help. Timothy started to complain that his stomach was in extreme pain, and soon he was in the bathroom vomiting and convulsing. Now sadly, less than an hour after Timothy ate the candy, the 8-year-old boy passed away. An autopsy was of course performed on the child, and it was noted that the smell of almonds was noticed on the boy's body, which I guess kind of indicates a huge sign of cyanide poisoning. Figuring out what the last thing that Timothy ingested was the pixie stick, the police were quickly trying to grab all of them. So of course they had Timothy's that he had already ate, his sister Elizabeth's, they were able to grab the 2 family friends, but the 5th child, Ronald couldn't remember which church boy he had given this pixie stick to. So they were in a bit of a panic to locate the boy and his parents before another child ingested this potential cyanide pixie stick. Now, luckily, after getting the word out, they were able to track down which boy got the pixie stick. They made it to his home, and some reports actually say they found the boy in bed, like with the pixie stick next to him because fortunately he had been unable to open it on his own because of how it was stapled. So luckily he did not ingest any of the cyanide. Now, this caused a huge panic once word got out that someone was poisoning children's trick-or-treat candy. Parents started throwing all the candy out, or they were taking it to the police stations to have the candy inspected to see if there were any other types of candy that were tainted with this cyanide. So of course, part of the investigation would be discovering where they got the pixie sticks from. But Ronald said he didn't remember what house it was that gave him the 5 pixie sticks, even though they only trick-or-treated about 2 streets that night because of how rainy it was, and there was very limited houses of which one it could be. Police questioned some of the neighbors, and according to them, no one had been handing out pixie sticks, so it was time they really needed to pinpoint what house Ronald had claimed had given him these pixie stick candies. So bringing Ronald out to the neighborhood, he finally recognized which house he allegedly got the candies from. Now, the owner of the house claimed he was not home that night, so therefore he was not giving out candy to trick-or-treaters. He worked as an air traffic controller at a local airport, and he had not got off work until like after 11 p.m. So he was not doing trick-or-treaters that night, and there was like over 100 witnesses that confirmed his alibi at work. He had not been giving out pixie sticks that night. So if that wasn't the house that they had got the candy from, why was Ronald Obryan claiming that it was? Or better yet, why was Ronald Obryan starting to look so suspicious? Now, as I said, from the outside, Ronald looked like a normal suburban family man with his wife and his kids, and contributed to church and went to work. But once police started digging into Ronald, they found more things that were very concerning. Over the past 10 years, Ronald had had over 20 jobs, and all of them had fired him for various versions of negligence. And his current employer was investigating him and about to fire him because they had proof that he had been stealing money from them. Looking into the family finances, they discovered that Ronald was over $100,000 in debt. He was on the verge of losing the car, the house, and was not paying their bills. And if all of that wasn't weird enough, police then found evidence that would really prove and show what exactly had happened in this case. Ronald had taken life insurance policies out on both of his 2 young children. In January 1974, he took $10,000 out on both of his kids. In September 1974, about a month before Timothy's death, he took out another $20,000 on each child, even though the insurance company didn't recommend this and tried to object to this additional life insurance policy. And if that wasn't weird enough, a few days before Halloween, Ronald took out another $20,000 policy on Timothy and Elizabeth. His wife claimed she had no idea that these policies even existed. During the investigation, it was actually the insurance company that contacted police and wanted to report Ronald Obryan's very bizarre behavior. On November 1st, the morning after his son died, he contacted the insurance company, wanting to know when and how he would be getting his money for his son's death. That's a red flag. Another person had contacted the police during the investigation. It was someone from a chemical supply store that was outside of Houston, and they claimed that Ronald came in and was asking about cyanide, but when he found out that there were heavy restrictions on how much you could buy at a time, he decided not to purchase anything with them and he left. With all of these pieces starting to fall together, they figured that Ronald himself had tampered with the pixie sticks and set up this whole elaborate scheme of getting it from this dark, mysterious house and give it to the other children so that it wouldn't only be his kids that were sick, so it wouldn't look suspicious to the life insurance policy. So how was justice served in this case? Well, even though they could never track down when or how Ronald Obryan got the cyanide, they had enough evidence that he was arrested on November 5th, 1974. He was indicted on 1 count, capital murder, for his son's death, and 4 counts of attempted murder for giving it to the 4 other kids, of course. Ronald pled not guilty to all 5 counts and declared his innocence in the whole case. His trial began in Houston on May 5th, 1975. So because of the panic that this case caused, the media took to calling him a few names like Candyman, the man who killed Halloween, and the Pixie Stick Killer. I think the Candyman has really stuck as a name with the Ronald Obryan case. For the trial, they had a few different witnesses come forward and make statements on the stand, if you will, one of which was a friend of Ronald's, but who was also a chemist. Now, he claimed in the summer of 1973, Ronald was asking him about cyanide, the effects of it, and how much would be fatal if ingested. Friends and family also testified that Ronald's fascination with cyanide was not really a kept secret. He was very vocal about the knowledge he had about it and how it could kill people and what it would do to people. He talked about it all the time, so he wasn't exactly keeping it on the down low. And his sister-in-law and brother-in-law testified that at his son's funeral, he was kind of bragging about how he was going to take a nice vacation and buy a bunch of cool stuff, all with the insurance money that he was getting from his son's death. And he was talking about that at the funeral. Ronald's legal team really tried to play up the fear in the community, and they kind of referenced urban legends, if you will. The poisoning of candy, finding razor blades in apples or food, all of those urban legends that have been proved to be false. There aren't any cases relating to those that have actually happened, but they really tried to do that for the jury, but their attempt at pointing the finger away from Ronald failed. Almost trying to suggest that there was in fact a madman out there that was poisoning all the children's candy.
Most of today's testimony came from Jimmy Bates, a close friend of the Obryan family. Bates said that before Halloween, Obryan asked if he could bring his children over to trick-or-treat with the Bates children on Halloween night. Both families ate dinner together, and then the fathers took the children trick-or-treating. Bates said Obryan went to one house where no one appeared to be home, and after the children had scampered ahead to the next house, Obryan came off the front porch carrying the pixie sticks.
In this case, the jury took 45 minutes to find Ronald guilty on all 5 counts. They would take another 71 minutes to sentence him to death by electrocution. Now, Ronald's wife, of course, divorced him and remarried, and her new husband adopted their daughter, Elizabeth. I hope that they were able to move on and find some sort of happiness in their new life after such a tragic way of losing your son and your brother, and from someone that you were supposed to love and trust. Now, while in prison, it's noted that all the other inmates hated him. He had a horrible time in prison. Oh well. But the fellow people on death row didn't like him because he had murdered his son, and the other inmates pretty much protested against him. So his time in prison was not pleasant. So Ronald Obryan had been given the death penalty. His first execution date was scheduled for August 8th, 1980. But his lawyer was able to delay that one, so they set a second date. That date was May 25th, 1982. But again, that date was postponed. The third date was October 31st, 1982, which would have been the 8th anniversary of Timothy's murder, which would have been so fitting, I feel. But unfortunately, that did not come to pass. The Supreme Court ended up delaying it, giving him another chance for appeal. His final date was March 31st, 1984. His lawyers tried to get a stay of execution again, saying that death by lethal injection was cruel and unusual punishment, although I'm not sure exactly how you compare that to poisoning your child with cyanide, but that was rejected, and he was executed that day. In his final moments, he maintained his innocence, and he thought that being executed was cruel and unfair. Some of his last quote is, "If in any of my 39 years I have offended anyone, I hope they will forgive me as I forgive them. I also pray and ask God's forgiveness for all of us, respectively, as human beings. God bless you all, and may God's best blessings be always yours." Okay. During his execution, there were like 300 people outside cheering, clapping, and yelling trick or treat. So, happy Halloween! So had you guys heard of this Candyman killer? Ronald Obryan. Had you heard about this case? It is definitely one of the bigger reasons that today we still check kids' candy to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. Although, like I said, the cases of kids' candy being poisoned are like non-existent, but this one really took the fear and pumped it up into the communities across the country in 1974, and to this day, we are still cautious of poisoned candy for the children. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this episode. I hope you have a safe and happy Halloween.